Hi, this is Simon Day of Once Upon a Tree Cider and Perry. We're located in Ledbury in Herefordshire in Great Britain, and you're listening to Cider Chat.
Episode 180. Hello and welcome to Cider Chat. My name is Aria Windcaller, and I am the producer and cider MC of this weekly podcast, where we speak with makers, cider enthusiasts, and folks within the cider trade from around the world. This week, it is a conversation with Simon Day of Once Upon a Tree, based in Great Britain. There'll be more on that, but first, a wee bit of news out and about in Ciderville. UK writer and cider promoter Susanna Forbes, also part of Little Pomona, her new book, The Cider Insider, is going to be released into the U.S. market at the end of May. And you could get in the runnings for a free copy of this book by retweeting a tweet that we're going to be posting when that episode goes live. So you want to prepare for that now. Just follow at Cider Chat and at Drink Britain. And keep an eye out for that, and you'll be getting some clues coming up. So that's your pre-homework for that episode. And if you're not on Twitter, but you want to get your name into the hat, just send an email to ria@ciderchat.com. We like orchards and having some fun. A little bonus of sending me an email as a query or a little bit of a hello, you automatically get subscribed to the E-Cider News, which is a monthly, sometimes more often, newsletter that I send out with little behind-the-scene tips and reminders. It could be on a competition that I'm really recommending. It could be listen to this particular chat that's really cool, or a special offering that's going out to the patrons of Cider Chat at the Cider Chat Patreon page. So there's a lot of value there. You send an email to me as a query, or you could sign up for the eCider News when you go to ciderchat.com. On that same note about reminders and whatnot, well, if you've been regularly listening to this here podcast, you know that I've been shouting it from the mountaintops, toting it every single week, telling you about the Totally Cider Tour to Normandy, France, the last week of September. Well, I have to rein that in, and I want to let you know that last call is coming up here, folks. It ends on May 31st. So this here podcast is going out on May 15th. That means 16 days from the release of this podcast to sign up for the Cider Tour. So I'm going to give you a moment to think about that. I like crickets too, but they don't really make the best drinking buddies. They really don't. I'd rather hang out with people who want to raise a glass and really live fully and who are excited about learning traditions of cider making, food pairings with cider making, and immersing themselves into the culture and, frankly, just having a blast. No grumps allowed on this tour. That is the way it rolls. So you could either hang out with these guys or come along with me and a fun-loving group of cider tours to the Pays d'Auge and Domfront region of Normandy. Last call ends for this tour on May 31st.
Walking through the orchards, dancing in the streets, smelling all the blossoms, kicking up our feet. We're just walking through the orchards, dancing in the streets, smelling all the blossoms, kicking up our feet.
Kick up those feet now. It's time now to head to the featured chat with Simon Day of Once Upon a Tree in Great Britain.
Yay!
If you're like me and you live in the U.S., well, Once Upon a Tree is not yet being imported into this country. And I say yet because I feel really hopeful that that might change soon. Fingers crossed. In the meanwhile, do know that this cidery collaborates wildly with other makers. One very well-known maker is Shacksberry. So there's a good chance maybe in your spot of Ciderville you'll be able to find a can of Shacksberry Dry, which has 25% of bittersweet from Once Upon a Tree. So while you're filling your glass, we're going to take a little pause here. And for those of you who are riding down the road, as always, keep your hands on the wheel and your eyes on the road, because this chat will be waiting for you and hopefully a cider too when you're ready to kick it back. When Simon was 2, his father got a job working at a vineyard, and that vineyard also had apples and pears growing there too. So when we sat down to speak, although we didn't speak directly on the topic of the cider is wine debate, I do suspect that his early upbringing, which was obviously entrenched in the wine culture, certainly informed him as it informs him today. He will be attending the upcoming London Wine Fair being held May 20th to the 22nd with the Cider is Wine Alliance. Now, this is a newly formed nonprofit group based in the UK whose mission is to create a new quality drinks category for ciders and perries produced from 100% apples and pears. Simon's own background before starting Once Upon a Tree was also in the wine industry, specifically grapes, from what I understand. And that led him to work globally in businesses in the UK, to the Pacific Northwest, Australia, and on the Channel Island of Guernsey, which is right off the coast of Normandy, France. And Guernsey, by the way, has a rich cider-making history too. For Simon, as for all of us, there is always a major life pivotal moment that can change your life's trajectory. And that's where we're going to start this chat with Simon.
May 2007, the Big Apple Association have their cider event in Putney at the village hall there, and I decided to go along, and I took my brother-in-law, he came with me, and we ended up tasting a lot of ciders and chatting with a lot of producers. That was the other light bulb moment, and everything all connected at that point. And I came out of that hall and I felt like I had, I don't know, like 5 foot of sponges tied to the bottom of my feet. I just walked home absolutely,
I love it.
Floating home really, full of ideas. I think we met the people that own the orchard down in Normandy, and we had a couple of meetings, and we had a couple of ciders at those meetings.
And this is the 30-acre orchard? No, that was your...
Yeah.
Okay,
No, it's Dragon Orchard. So they've got about 17 acres of cider fruit, and then there's about 8 acres of mostly dessert varieties, culinary fruit. A lot of heritage varieties planted in there. There's about 30 odd different varieties.
Okay.
So yeah, we had a few meetings, and I said, well, I think I can make some nice cider. I can invest in some equipment. You've got the fruit. They also had a barn just freed up at that point. So they had the premises and said, do you think this is something we could do together? And off we went, with a feeling that this was maybe really going to be just a little hobby business. I think we made that decision to do something in August 2007. So I had about a month before harvest to get all the kit bought and put in.
Wow.
We didn't spend a lot of money on the kit, to be fair. We found lots of second-hand stuff, but we got ourselves going. And
what were you pressing with at that point? What kind of press?
it was a Varan mill and press. In fact, it was the one that I was using in Jersey.
Oh, no kidding! Wow.
Because they'd upgraded their press, so I gave them a call and said, "Well, if you're not using that one, I might buy it off you." So we shipped that one back.
It's a nice press
to the UK, and it was So the little 2-bed press, and off we went. And because of this influence of St Marlow and this connection with food, that's really what I wanted to do. There's plenty of fantastic farmhouse style cider producers at the time, but there was no one making a wine style cider in any sort of commercial way. So that's what I wanted to explore, because obviously that was my background. And so we produced three ciders, 3 still ciders, 75 centilitre bottles, presented more like wine than majority of the ciders that were on the market. With a view to matching foods. So we had dry, crisp ciders that went with, even fish dishes. Fish and chips was obviously a classic in the UK. I use the higher tannins to match with sort of the typical Sunday roasts, if you like, in the UK. So sort of heavier meats, red meats.
Is that how you were advertising it to people?
Well, we weren't advertising. We would. This is me. This is all in my head.
Okay.
This is what I'm doing. I had no idea whether anyone would like what I was doing.
I want to hear what the third one was. There was 3 different ciders. So one was
actually those are the two. We made a single varietal Dabinette as well, which is also very heavy on tannins. But it was something I just, when I tasted it, I wanted to explore even further. So that's at that point, and we come on to other food matching ciders later. But I made the ciders. I was pretty pleased with them. We bottled them the following April in 2008, and we entered the International Cider and Perry competition held at the Cider Museum in Herefordshire.
Yes.
So those 3 ciders went into the 3 categories, and they all came first. We were all away on different holidays at the time, so we had no idea, and I really didn't expect anything to happen.
Yeah.
But I just got this phone call or text message, and you've won. People are asking about you. No one knows about you. So it just took off from that, and we were able to then say, "Oh, well, okay, this sounds interesting. People are quite keen to explore this," and people bought it, and we were we were high priced at the time. We
all
were
in the kind of wine style bottles.
Yeah. So we were pitching our ciders at sort of £4 to £5 per 75 centilitres. I don't think that's pretty cheap in the US from what I've seen, but in the UK there was nobody selling cider for that sort of money. So, but I said,
who were your customers, Simon? What were you finding?
I was targeting wine drinkers.
Right.
That was what I wanted to do. Was
that your connection to? In the wine world, did they know who Simon Day was?
So to a degree,
you had a certain established brand already.
Well, not as a person. Yeah. People
Which is
do.
valuable.
Yeah, it is. So, but to be honest, most of those connections were other producers. But I did make
in first place also catapults you too into a certain market, no doubt.
There were certain wine writers that I knew who were keen to taste and write about us. Jamie Good was one of them, and that helped to move things along.
Absolutely.
So we found ourselves selling out actually pretty rapidly in 2008, and it was it was quite a nice surprise that people were keen to try them.
Yeah.
That following harvest, with a global recession happening all around us.
That's right.
We kind of went
in the beginning of the global recession.
Yeah, absolutely. So we kept things small. So we did our 7,000 litres again in 2008. So 7,000 litres being below which you don't pay duty in the UK. So it's a big incentive a big leap to get over it.
Yeah.
So we did that in 2009 because in 2008 we made our 7,000 litres, all went out in 75 centilitre bottles, 10,000 thereabouts, and we sold out again rapidly. And we thought, well, actually, I think we've got something here. So we went to about 25,000 litres in 2009. And since then, we've just been growing and growing and growing. And then the rate of acceleration has been growing as well. So now last year, 2018, we pressed about 450 tonnes of fruit. From 10 tonnes.
Yeah, you're
10
moving
years
up.
ago. And we're seeing that growing as well. There's a lot of interest. We do a lot of contract work. So it's not all Once Upon a Tree branded. That's steadily growing, but it's not growing at a really fast rate within the UK. But we are seeing growth in offering contract services, so contract pressing, contract cider making,
and juice.
Through to finish.
Would you say is it contract juice that? And because you're
contract juicing, yeah.
I mean, should we move there a little bit to the collaboration? Because you do collaborate with Sharksberry and.
Well, that was.
And I don't want to get away. I want to go back to the Once Upon a Tree brand, exactly what you're doing there. But I think this is interesting for folks out in Ciderville to know that you have this kind of like multi-tiered business model and how you're branching out into the cider world. It's not just your one brand.
That's right.
And I don't think a lot of people realize your connection and collaboration happens in the brewing world, and it happens quite a bit in the cider world, even more so now. So I think that would be a nice place to start.
Well, shall I? I'll go. Well, it's 2000. I think it was 2011 or 12. 2011, I think it was. One day, nice bright sunny day, I had a phone call, and on the end of the phone, sat in the office, and on the end of the phone was this American guy, and we've had a few Americans visit who are cider makers. He said, I'm going to be in your area this afternoon. Can I come and see you? I said, well, I can spare you half an hour, but it'd be lovely to see you. I'll give you a tasting. And so up pops Colin Davis
from
Vermont, and we got on so well. He was such a nice guy, and that half an hour that I promised him turned into about 4 or 5 hours, and then so we spent the whole afternoon just chatting cider, tasting, and just it was a really nice introduction. And at the end of it, he just said, well, I'd like to take 2 or 3 bottles. No, 2 or 3 IBCs, 3,000 litres. And, okay, well, I don't have that much. We're not producing that sort of quantity at the moment. So that I had no idea he was looking to do any collaboration. But he was on a tour around France.
So he didn't introduce himself as looking for that?
No, he didn't. He just...
A little bit of a backdoor there, Colin.
Yeah, that's right. He was just a friendly guy from the States, interested in cider. So,
Sure.
But then, he then started to explain what they were looking to do with Shaftesbury and start with him and David. And it was, what an exciting moment, and what a great meeting that was. I was full of trepidation because we weren't looking at doing anything export-wise. Had no idea about export, and you hear lots of scary stories about certainly into the States with alcohol. So we had to do a lot of learning.
But were you exporting juice to Shaftesbury or
cider?
You were cider, right?
Yeah,
and so that's a difference. So.
Yeah.
Big difference.
It is, yeah. So I think Colin was taken with what we were producing and really could see,
absolutely,
the whole ethos behind of what we were trying to do, and that very much linked with their thinking. So it was pretty perfect, really. And in fact, later on, when they were looking for a Spanish cider producer, I went over to Spain with David to help choose that producer and learn a bit more about what they were doing there. So that was great fun. So we've worked pretty closely in those early years, and those volumes, and that was quite transformative to our little business, because the volumes that we were exporting. Well, it's about 50% of our production comes over to the States currently.
The impact here is so bountiful, because as this man walking down the path with your dog, looking at these apples, thinking there could be waste there, or there could be cider.
Yeah.
And this is a critical juncture, I think, worldwide for so many orchards and orchardists looking at their apples and saying, how do we expand? So from my perspective, it's so lovely that you are able to really meet that demand for Shaftesbury, but also helping preserve apples.
That's really important for us.
Huge.
We've got a fantastic landscape of orchards where we are. We're on the Markle Ridge. The whole Big Apple Association is about preserving that landscape as well and promoting that. And we're a small part of that, I think, in growing Once Upon a Tree to be a high-value product and worth, we hope, what you're paying for it. That actually allows us to pay a fair price for the apples. So that has knock-on effects right through. It means that those trees will hopefully be in the ground for a lot longer. And at the moment, England's in a bit of a crisis. There's far too many apples out there. I'm offered very, very cheap fruit at the moment.
And part of that is with Bulmer's stepping away from a lot of his contracts. So I'm curious about that. Right, Bulmer's is owned by Heineken.
Yeah. So
and that original orchard that was selling to Bulmer's, would that orchard have been impacted by that sell-off?
What's happening. They're, to be honest, I think they're being pretty fair with how they're dealing with it.
As fair as one can be.
As fair as one can be.
I mean, there's a certain reality of business.
So certainly Anne and Norman have there is a voluntary arrangement where Heineken are paying to come out of contract, and part of their orchard has come out of contract because we're taking it anyway. But there are other producers where contracts are coming up for renewal, and of course they're not being renewed. So there are vast swathes, hundreds, thousands of tons of apples that don't currently have a home
It's a big
going
concern.
forward. So it is a concern. But at the same time, we've got this really, really exciting, burgeoning craft industry that's happening. And this is what I mentioned our contract pressing. There was hundreds of tons that came through our press for other cider producers, all working at a relatively small level, a small volume, but high quality.
Established cider producers? I'm just kind of curious.
Mostly new.
Mostly new cider
Yeah.
producers.
Yeah.
And so you're pressing, just for the listeners of Cider Chat are both cider makers and just folks who just enjoy drinking cider. So, so just so listeners understand what Simon's talking about, this means that at Once Upon a Tree, they are pressing the apples and then setting that up for other cider makers, other businesses, to then create their own product out of that.
That's right. Yep.
You're not fermenting it as you did for like Shaftesbury. You're pressing the juice.
Some we do. So
some you do. Okay.
People can come in and out. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
We do a lot of contract pressing. So people are bringing their apples from different orchards, or sometimes we supply the apples for them. We've got our partner growers, so Anna Norman at Dragon Orchard, but also Nigel and Alina Rollinson, who are also in Putley, have got a large acreage. So we work closely with them to make sure that people have got the apples they require. We can source different varieties, and then we press that. They either take it away as juice, or we can take it to the next stage and ferment it. What it means is that people don't actually have to invest in the infrastructure to start their own cider business.
Which is huge.
Yeah,
you have a press, you're only using it once a year.
Exactly.
So now what type of press do you have?
So,
because now you've scaled up.
Yeah, we have
diversified,
but
in
we
an
haven't
interesting way.
gone the sort of normal route. We didn't do belt press, or we haven't gone as far as a booker press. But when I went to Sirius with David at Shaftesbury, the one thing that struck me was they were all using ex-Rioja presses, wine presses, and the quality of the juice was coming out was really good. So I thought, actually, well, we're making wine as well, and we're increasing our wine volumes. It makes sense to get a press that will do both. So that's what we did. So we put a big ATI soft press. It takes ATI, Italian company.
Okay.
And they, in fact, they promote it for apple pressing as well as grape pressing. So it's dual purpose, very soft pressures compared to your rack and cloth presses, which on the guide they're like 400 bar or something, but we press up to about 1.5, 1.6 bar. But it's a very different process. But you're still getting very good extraction. But you're probably getting a little less tannin level, and we're probably getting a slightly higher clarity of the juices coming off, depending on the quality of the fruit that goes in.
But if you have already, if you're working with premier cider apple varieties, and that has a nice tannin level, you're kind of meeting it at both ends. Then. Not bad.
Yeah, so that's what we've gone. So we can press, if in a normal day, so starting at 8 and finishing at 5 or 6, we'll press 12 tons a day through there. So 3 batches.
That's cool.
And then if we're pushed, then we'll carry on through the night. So we'll kind of double that in a day. That's our throughput.
Nice.
I think we are probably a year or two off buying a second press, and at that point I'll decide whether I put in a belt press or we go for another big wine press.
Wow.
But we're
so
working well.
This is very interesting, Simon. So you've really added like value-added product to your business model.
Yeah.
Where some folks go into cider making and they're just doing their kind of like boutique cidery or orchard-based cidery, and having their primary brand. But the fact that you've been informed by your travels and your other history in winemaking, and also being business savvy to diversify, really has done a couple different things, really increased your reach out into the world. But again, I just want to keep on going back that this is so critical for orchards,
Yeah.
what you're doing. I mean, and to also keep on encouraging new makers, as Colin and David were, a number of years ago. It was around the same time that this was kicking out.
Yeah, absolutely. That whole connection of people and place is really at the heart of everything we do. So we do excuse me, we do talk a lot about our growers, so Anna Norman and Nigel and Lena, and that whole connection is very, very important to us.
Absolutely.
And our fine ciders are made with local field references, so Chapel Pleck and Markle Ridge being the ridge that are behind it. So I think provenance is kind of key to what we do.
Should we try a little cider here?
Of course, yeah.
So I'm kind of curious about this one. Is this your product solely?
It is, yeah.
Okay,
So this is a Once Upon a Tree bottle. It's our still cider, Markle Ridge. This has changed over the years a little bit in the way that we construct it. So when I first started, it was using a lot of bitter sharp. So it was a high proportion of Brown's apple in there to bring that acidity. That's actually changed. See, my evolution as a cider maker has been interesting. So when I first started, I was entirely in wine mode, and we were making a very clean product. We were racking the juice, settling the juice, racking the juice, and it was wine-like, sort of kind of a one-dimensional but very fruitful. It was expressing the fruit well, I felt, but there was perhaps not so much complexity. And as time has gone on, I've relaxed. And I've kind of thought, let's introduce a bit of funk in there, and let a bit of wild.
Which is a big thing for a winemaker.
It is. It's releasing control. Oh my! It's a scary thing to venture down as a winemaker. Shall I pour you
yes, please.
a little drop of this? So this is, as I say, this is an older vintage. This is 2014. So we're a couple of vintages on in the UK now.
I want to just describe the nose that I'm getting. I haven't sipped it yet, but I want you to just imagine for a second you're walking out on a fall day. There's been a little bit of rain. Some apples have fallen on the ground. Maybe some of them have been stepped on, and there's this floral bouquet of apple coming off. There are a couple bees lazily dipping onto the apples. This is that light type of apple bouquet that kind of pops out of this nose. It's very delicate, and that's the invitation to kind of come in and sip a little bit further. It's really interesting.
That's fantastic. I'm going to write that down for my back label, I think. Yeah, it's got some real, some funky notes, some little bit of barnyard in there.
I love that. I mean, 2014, let's think, we're 5 years.
Yeah.
It's 2019 right now, just for folks listening 10 years from now to this episode. It has really come into itself.
Yeah.
Can you talk about what you noticed when you first made this and what you were anticipating?
I think you kind of
it's delicious.
I mean, it's still got a reasonable amount of freshness to the aromatics, which I'm surprised at. I felt that
it's
whole
subtle.
Yeah. I felt that it would have lost a degree of that. It's tasting fresher than I expected, I have to say. I thought that the tannins would have be a lot softer, but there's still a bit of grip there on the finish.
Yeah, I'm getting it's like a umami type of
It is quite a savoury.
Wow, the finish, cider. Really full mouth kind of umami, which you don't often get. So the tannins aren't as pronounced to me.
Okay. Yeah.
But I mean that's okay. It's just It's not like a cider has to be really tannic or whatever. Take it where it's going to lead you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think they probably have softened a degree since we bottled those tannins. But I like that finish, that sort of cleanness. Obviously, the tannins give it weight, give it body, and structure through the mid palate. But you want to end on a long finish, but a very clean. Your mouth is really. I was wanting to have another glass, actually. Want to have another sip.
What would you classically pair food-wise with this type of style. You have that, it's a sweetness coming through, and while he's kind of like tasting, I want to describe the color. Just in the bottle is this rich amber, like apricot color. It's very bright. A very nice presentation. This is a screw cap bottle. I'm not sure what the ABV is on that. Would be
6.5.
6.5.
Yeah, so no dilution in this.
Yeah, just a really nice presentation bottle, and then the actual finish through. In my novice experience here of sipping cider, it is taking you on that journey that you want to have. You know, it's definitely, to me, you could drink this alone, but I'm really like, let me have some food with this. So, getting back to that question, what would you classically pair?
Well, one of my favourite pairings is grilled sardines with this,
lovely.
and so sort of oily fish flavours work. I feel work really well with it. You've got a certain level of acidity to cut through. But also it's powerful enough to stand up with those quite intense flavours. I've had it with oysters as well, which worked really well.
Oh, I bet, yeah.
And usually I say, fish and chips. Perfect with fish and chips with this one.
Well, what English cider isn't perfect with fish and chips, right? I mean,
absolutely. But charcuterie and so on. Some of those
a little bit of oily that you're going to get really kind of cuts through it, but wouldn't overwhelm it. And I think that's the thing when pairing cider and food, you're going to know when it doesn't match. You're going to know it's going to be on, and you'll kind of step back. Don't blame the cider for that. Just use that as another good reason to try something different.
Exactly. Yeah.
It happens
Definitely.
all the time, and that's the adventure of this. It really is.
Yeah.
Wonderful. I love that. That's absolutely fantastic cider.
Thank you.
And you got to be happy. 2014. I think folks don't realize that. We often just look into the wine world, or if you're in the beer world and you're used to drinking like a more imperial barrel-aged beer, I can put that away, but you could do the absolute same thing with cider, and you should. In fact, as a rule of thumb, once you find a good cider that you like, always make sure you get 2 bottles, and I would highly recommend get 3, because you're going to want to drink that first bottle, and you'll be like, I have to have that other second bottle, but I got to wait. So get 3. My goodness, get a case. Let it see how it's going to go. It's so much fun.
It's one of the again, it's the winemaker in me, but having the vintage on the bottle is very important, because every year I feel the cider is a celebration of the season that preceded it. So I'm striving to make the very best of cider I can from that season, and I think that's important. I'm not necessarily looking for consistency year on year, although we'll blend to a style. But I would expect it to be different each vintage.
Something you could do in the UK. In the US, that is not permissible.
I'm learning now. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Although there's certain ways to get around that. Sometimes you see on a label, made in 2014. That's one way to do that. Or, I always write it on my homemade cider, but the labeling process put on by the Alcohol, Tobacco and Trade, better known as the TTB, does not allow that for labeling. They don't get cider in that way as they do for wine, and it is criminal. Absolutely criminal. But
that explains. I had noticed that no one puts it on, and there we are. So now I know why.
It's
bizarre.
Kooky. It's going to change, and so I believe it's going to change. We can only hope.
Well, it's going to help the smaller producers tell the story, isn't it?
Just what you said. I mean, it changes year to year.
Exactly.
If we didn't know that was 2014, then how are we going to educate ourselves and really celebrate that year of 2014? It could have been a wedding, a birth, a celebration of life at some level. It's just all part of it. I just, before we move on here, Once Upon a Tree. The brand, the branding that you have. So I'm looking at the label. It's in this, fun font, Once Upon a Tree, in a block. And then coming out of this, square block is this beautiful tree. So
Yeah.
you just
It was
want to talk a little bit about that branding?
Well, it came. We had a group of friends and a very boozy night when we decided we were going to form this company, and we were just brainstorming the whole evening over a meal, and we wrote all sorts of things down on pieces of paper, and that one popped out in the morning. But I'm so pleased it did, because obviously it's harking back to the orchard. The crooked tree logo, actually, the tree that was in our garden, there was a beautiful old apple tree that looked just like that, a real sort of S shape to the trunk. So that's why that's on there, and then the whole thing grounded in this big block, which represents the soil, the earth where it all comes from. So these fantastic big heavy clay soils that Hereford has got. It's such a perfect place for growing apples. So that's kind of what came into the design. And Once Upon a Tree, obviously, it's talking about the trees, that connection with the orchard. That's how it started, and people tend to remember it.
Well, it's like
telling a story.
The first line of a book.
Yeah,
Once upon a tree, and then it's a story that never ends.
Yeah. Well, we say a story in every bottle.
A story in every bottle.
Yeah.
Well, absolutely. I mean, this Markle Ridge.
Markle Ridge, yeah.
Markle Ridge. MARCLE
Yeah.
Ridge. 2014 dry cider. It says Herefordshire cider, and you said 6.5%.
5%.
Yeah. I want to just talk a little bit about the ice perry that I had brought back from one of my travels overseas. I was so excited. It was I think the only ice perry that I've had at this point.
Yeah.
It really stood out on the shelf. I had picked it up at Apples and Pears in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands, and brought it back to the States, and served or packaged in the classic dessert wine bottle. Now we associate that with ice cider bottles, of course, and it had this this was about I'm going to say 2 years or so, maybe as much as 3 years ago, perhaps. The hue, I know you're going to know the color, but it was very light, very kind of light. Like sometimes you see an ice cider is going to be dark, maybe really, really dark, but it had that kind of classic perry or poire look, very light, almost greenish kind of hue that just screams, I'm a perry pear.
Maybe that was 2008, actually. So 2009 was our first year with trialling with pears, because we were, and the apple one has been done every year, but the pear one, I couldn't find anyone anywhere in the world that had done it with pears. And pears have a lot more challenges compared to the apples. And these weren't perry pears, because I didn't want to concentrate the tannins. So I actually used dessert pears. So we used Conference and Comets grown on the orchard to make this. And we did the same process.
I just want to say those two varieties again. So you said
Comis,
yeah,
and Conference.
Yeah. And you could find these pears in not just in the UK, but you could find them in a lot of different places. So.
So we pressed those again, held them over the winter, pressed them in January, did the same thing, got the same sort of level of concentration from the cryo concentration. Everything was going very well, and we started the ferment. And then when I came to stop the ferment, it just wouldn't. It was very different the way it reacted compared to the cider. I'm not sure. I mean, at the time we had no real facilities other than a heavy dose of sulfite and filtration. So that's what we were doing to stop it at that stage. And every time I thought I'd stopped it, got it through a filter, within a day or two, it would kick off again. And in the end, I said, well, what I was trying to do was so with our ice cider, we ferment to about 7%, partly to keep it in the cider category for duty.
That's the tax.
The tax
That's
duty, tax band.
Yeah.
But also I wanted to retain lots of that real vibrant, fresh, juicy flavour.
Yeah.
And I wanted to do the same with pear, but then it just carried on. I thought, right, I just have to let it go. And it got to 13% and then naturally stopped. And what we ended up with was actually a product that was much more typical of an ice wine, much more that richer, rounded, warming character. It's still, because of the concentration, it had acidity, but much lower than our cider. And I said, well, this really works because it's so different than
Really different.
our apple, the cider, ice cider. So I've done it the same ever since now. What we do is concentrate it to a higher degree in the first place to retain enough sugar to still get that real dessert flavour.
Yeah.
But we call it we have to call it a pear ice wine as opposed to an ice perry. And as part of for me,
why is that?
Because the alcohol level puts it into the what's called a made wine category in the UK. But also because I'm not using perry pears, I want to make sure. For me, it's important to be clear about in the labelling whether it's perry pears or
not
or dessert
culinary.
pears.
Yeah.
So that's taken off in
and
quite
so
a nice way.
you are making it every year now.
We are,
This is a product that you can see. I know that you can get it if you're traveling into Europe at different cider. Well, Netherlands has 2 cider shops.
Yeah.
Who would have thought?
Yeah.
Rotterdam and Amsterdam, cider in Rotterdam. And in the U.S., would we see?
No, not yet.
Darn.
Not yet.
Darn.
So
we'll let you all know when that happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Watch the space on that. Should we try this?
I would love to, if you're game. And what he's talking about is the perry that he's reaching for. This is a traditional method, sparkling perry, which means it's like that champagne method that is used, except that is a trademark name by the French, so we don't use that word in deference to them.
That's right. But, of course, who invented champagne, or the champagne method, the traditional method?
Oh, the
British. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, we're reinventing the tradition, if you like, of sparkling cider, because it was really we understand that it was cider that started being fermented in bottle first, and then the British wine trade was starting to then do secondary fermentation with wines that they were importing from Champagne, which previously, of course, was still, and it was the ability to get a bottle that was strong enough to contain the pressure, that was kind of the key moment when the furnaces started using coal instead of wood because of James I outlawing the use of wood because he needed it for his navy, and there was a whole other story there. But what ended up is that the British were able to produce this heavyweight glass that could withstand the pressures that were in there. So
and we're all the better
it was
for
born.
it.
No, I think the champagne was developed.
If I could say to the British, to the British.
Cheers.
Cheers. That kind of light coloring that you see when you look at a perry, very delicate. And when I mean delicate, it's not a color that's going to like scream out in the glass. It's almost like a Sauvignon Blanc, but you don't have that greenish hue. It's a very light, delicate yellow.
So this is using mostly blatantly red pears. We do have some others. Some I don't actually know the names of because they're coming in from a whole host of different growers, and they don't necessarily know the history of the trees. But we've got thorn, butt, yellow huffcapper in there, and then a whole host of others.
So how would you describe the nose on this perry? Because a lot of people don't know perry pears.
Yeah.
Or how to taste it or how to approach it.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that we can...
Well, I'm not sure. I'll have a go. I'm not sure that I can. I'm not.
Do your best, I'm sure.
Yeah. So I had, as I mentioned before, as a winemaker, I had real issues with perry because it smells like the start of oxidation in a wine. You've got that acetaldehyde coming through, but that is a fundamental part of perry. So it's that pear drop character coming through, those sorts of aromas, and it took me a long time to learn that actually that was the right thing in perry. So you've got those sorts of pear characteristics coming through. You've also got, this has had a long time on lees, so you start to get a bit of that interplay of the breakdown of the yeast as it's laid down on leaves, coming through on the nose. So you've got a slight sort of brioche, quite a sweet brioche note to it, on the aromatics. Then on the palate, it's quite clean. It's quite fresh. It's delicate, really delicate. And again, this is plainly red. So you've got this gorgeous, slightly caramelized pear characters coming through, and then obviously a nice sort of mouth-filling fizz, not overpoweringly fizzy. It's not going to, it's just a sort of a creamy texture to it, and then a long finish with a little bit of crispness, a little bit of tannin there. So yeah, it works well. A bit of finesse, really.
Oh, lovely, really lovely. I always, I don't know why, but I always get like a little bit of a spark of spice from a peri pear, and I get that on the nose here. It kind of, it's not pepper by any means, but it's like a spark of spice that wakes you up in a different way than the cider does. And it's a subtle way. That's a uniqueness of a peri pear, and why it's, again, so important to protect pear trees, because folks don't realize they are endangered, because people don't realize what might be in their backyard, or because they are kind of persnickety and difficult to work with, really critical to protect them. But they have this uniqueness, this aroma that is so unlike cider. And this is just, it's lovely. It's lovely. How are the pears in your orchard?
We don't actually have any on Dragon Orchard.
Okay.
So all of our pears come from individual trees that people have in their backyards.
Bringing them in.
There's been a couple of orchards near us that have been rescued. Some really, hundreds of year old trees which have been neglected. But trying to get those back into production, but also planting new trees. So we're seeing we've seen quite a bit of interest in replanting and planting some really interesting varieties. So we're working with one or two people, very small orchards. Our perry production is pretty small.
Yeah.
We're making about 10 to 12,000 litres a year.
Do you find that there's regional peri pear? Like in France, you have Pédoge, which is really focused on cider, and then Domfront, which is really pear land. I mean, it's superb pear land.
Yeah.
Do you have anything like similar like that, would you say? Or it's more overall the countryside?
No. Well, the three counties of Herefordshire, Worcestershire and Gloucestershire are the sort of the heartland of perry. And there's in the where these three counties join, there's a hill called Mayhill. And it's a very distinctive landmark. It's not a huge mountain or anything, it's just this lovely sort of shallow curve, and on the top is a cluster of really tall pine trees. So it's very, very distinctive in the landscape. And I can't remember the full story, but there is a legend of a character, a god or some sort of minor deity eating this perry pear. And of course, berry pears are awful to eat. They're so hard and bitter and nasty. He sort of spat the seeds out across the three counties, and so that is where perry pears are supposed to grow within sight of Mayhill. And certainly, I think that's where the clustering of these very old orchards, certainly around that area. You do see them popping up, and you see references in field names and road names all over the country, and sort of
the name of a road would be, for instance.
So the pear names. There's things like Perry Vale or things like that. So usually a perry connotation or a suffix or prefix to the name. So you can see where there probably were perry orchards in towns that have grown over them in the past.
Oh, okay.
So, but there's not that many.
Is there planting?
Commercial orchards.
Is there planting?
There has been, but not in a massive way. Not like in cider. So, it's still important to protect them.
It's important to protect them, and for education, for people to realize that this is an equally fantastical drink. It just and it's elegant. At a different level. So it is that, like, almost, it could be like a high society affair type of, in the fluted glassware. I find makers who are working with perry pear and doing the traditional champagne method of production, they get that. They get, you know, that they have this really unique product.
Yeah.
And so we need to support makers who are doing that and hopefully encourage them.
Absolutely. This is one of our main markets, actually, is for weddings. So local weddings to us, they're looking for a local drink, and it's naturally sort of celebratory. The fizz, as you say, pouring it into flutes. We've sold this to a lot of wedding couples as a sort of celebration drink.
Perfect celebration type of drink. I love it because it takes us on a really different path, and you have to dig into the perry at a level that cider you have to too, but it's unique.
Yeah. This is really good with, as a lot of perries are actually, really good with goat's cheese. I mean, you've got that sort of creaminess and that slight acidity, but this works through that and complements it so nicely. You've got this almost, a little hint of citrus about perries that works really well with it. So.
I haven't found it works well with like blue cheese. So I mean, just so folks know, some cheeses I would definitely leave in the pantry and don't go for it because it'll like be like a mouth disruptor.
Yeah, I don't think so. Anything with sort of salty characters, probably not. But any of the creamier soft cheeses, it's a better match.
Perfect for it. Really lovely. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing here and being on Cider Chat.
No, it's an honour. Thank you.
That was Simon Day of Once Upon a Tree, based in the UK. You know, we were tasting those ciders during that recording. We didn't finish the Markle Ridge. He let me keep it. I brought it up to my room during CiderCon. Thought I was going to finish it, but that didn't happen. But I'll tell you, there was no way I was going to be leaving that cider there or pouring it out. I had squirreled away some extra little water bottles, poured it into that, tucked it into my luggage that's going to be checked in the baggage, and brought it home and enjoyed it once I returned back to my spot of Ciderville. It was that good. The guy is a fine cider maker. And then he also gave me a bottle of that Champagne Method perry called Chapel Plec, which was insanely good too. What can you say about good cider except that we hope we have more, and I hope that we see the label Once Upon a Tree coming into the U.S. as soon as we can, and certainly if that happens, I will let you know. And as far as the cider is wine kind of topic, for me, the jury is still out, and I know it's working for Simon, and he is in that kind of clutch of people in the world who are kind of making cider like that, and I could name a number of them on my right hand right now. However, that is one kind of style of cider making. In the music world, there's a lot of different styles. You could have classical music on one end and hip-hop on the other. Now, music is all made the same way. You put notes on the page. Music is music. With classical music, I've never heard anybody debate, oh, geez, those violins playing, that isn't music. That doesn't work at all. But I do remember a time when folks debated whether or not hip-hop was music. Believe it or not, there was a time. But those times have passed. Of course, then again, there's always like grumpy people who always want to debate something. But for the most part, those times have passed. And now those two extremely different cultures of classical and hip-hop are just moving on with their own scene and keep on bringing people along with them in that way. And I believe that's going to be true for cider at some time, as we're kind of like working out this stage. We have to kind of just let it go with us and just keep on chanting what I like to chant, which is, what is cider? Cider is fun. And the more technical term of it is cider is fermented juice. Which brings me back to the Cider is Wine Alliance. Remember that their mission is all about promoting 100% apple and perry juice. And that is another kind of, debate that's going to probably be going on for a long time in terms of what you can or can't add to cider. But a cider wine, we're putting the same notes on the same page. But a cider wine, I think not. Cider is fun. So with that, you could put that in your pipe and smoke it. As my dad would say.
There is a reason why we drink it like this. Yes, there is a reason why we drink it like this. We like cider. We like palms. We like orchards. And having some fun.
Yes, there is. There is a reason why we do it like this and why we drink it like this. It's because simply we like cider and we like having some fun. That's my cousin Jay on the guitar, and I am singing with him, and I'm hoping in late June he and I will be recording a couple other different versions of this to kind of fine-tune the audio. Looking forward to that and bringing that to you, Ciderville, as we sing our way out and about through the orchards around the world. And before I sign off, I want to just remind you that you could either hang with or come along with me on the Totally Cider Tour headed to Normandy, France, the last week of September. Go to the Totally Cider page at ciderchat.com. This is Rhea Windcaller, signing off for now. Looking forward to seeing you in Ciderville.
We like cider. We like palms. We love orchard and having fun. There is a reason why we do it like this. Yes, there is a reason why we do it like this. Oh, yes, there is a reason why we drink it like this. Yes, there is a reason why we do it like this. We like walking through the orchards, dancing in the street, smelling all the blossoms, kicking up our feet. We like cider. We like palms. We like orchards, having some fun. There is a reason why we do it like this. Oh yes, there is. There's a reason why we do it like this.
Oh yes, there is.
There is a reason why we drink it like this.
Yes, there is.
There is a reason. We like walking through the orchards, dancing in the street, smelling all the blossoms, kicking up our feet.
Oh yeah.
We like cider.
Oh yes, we do.
We like palms.
Oh yes, we do.
We love orchards, having some fun. There is a reason why we do it like this. There is a reason why we do it like this. Walking down the orchards, dancing in the street, smelling all the blossoms, kicking up our feet.
Oh yeah.
We like cider. We like palms.
Oh yes, we do.
We like orchards, having some fun.
Yeehaw!